Chapter 5 Defeat and Reunion. During the grand fighting spectacle that Remy had orchestrated for his own solace of entertainment, Leon was still chained to the carriage, but quickly noticed he was able to move. Vance and Dane, on the other hand, remained frozen in place, unable to do much more than blink. Leon thought that this was more on the side of them being allowed to blink, rather than them doing this of their own volition. He began searching for a way to escape, but with the chains as solid as they were, and with no way that he could see to unlock them, he was at an impasse. Great, he thought to himself. Go on a camping trip. Oh, it'll be so fun. You need to relax. If you only knew, he told himself, thinking of how things might be different had he never decided to take that little vacation. There's got to be some way out of this. No matter who wins or loses, I'm SOL and thrown to the wayside. In the distance, the king had summoned what seemed to be snow leopard sculptures that were made of ice with snow for spots. They moved around animatedly, seemingly of their own free will. They attacked the guardian together with the king. This seemed to be just enough to put him on a more equal footing with the guardian. One charged at it and pounced, going for its throat. It was similar to what Leon had seen from one of the leopards in the king's memory. While the leopard got in a few hits on the guardian, they were both dealt with quickly enough, as it sliced them into tiny bits. The guardian's brutal strength and graceful handling of the halberds were on full display at this point. I've got to figure something out, Leon thought. I mean, apparently I have powers, but how in the hell am I supposed to use them? This question continued to bug him as he struggled to try and spark something inside of him that could allow for escape. Alas, it wasn't as easy as flipping a switch on or off. They probably think I'm crazy. Leon thought that he had probably made a face that looked as though he was constipated while trying to make something happen, and that Dane and Vance were perhaps wondering what the hell he was doing or laughing at him. Though in reality, while they were both a bit confused, both of them were more worried about what was going on. From what I've learned, powers manifest in different ways, and even if my death was the same as someone else's death, there's no telling if my conquest will work the same. So how am I supposed to figure this out? Suddenly, a small quick light was flashed across his eyes. It reminded him of when a cell phone would reflect the sun's light and blind him. A moment later, it happened again. Leon looked around, slowly searching, only to come up with nothing. It wasn't until the third time that he finally saw it. There was a person in a cloak high up in the upper levels of the snowy volcanic mountain. It seemed that the light was being reflected from the person's blade, but it was the quick burst of intense light coming from their palm that was causing the reflection to take place. It was otherwise mostly hidden from sight. This is because whoever it was had been sheltering it with their cloak. They were clasping their hand around it in the same way one might do when trying to block a lighter from the wind. Why is this person alerting only me to their location? I hope they're not expecting much, as I can't even do anything for myself. Could they be an ally? Moments later, the cloaked individual nodded and vanished from sight in the ever-intensifying blizzard storm. No one else had seemed to notice it, as most of them were fixated on the fight that was going on in front of them. That, or the giant creatures keeping them captive. Even if Dane or Vance had somehow noticed, it's not like they could do or say anything about it. Remy himself was wholly immersed in the fight that he had arranged. With metal clashing and grit shining, he seemed to be delighted with it all. He became so overjoyed in the process that in a moment of awe, he had launched some of his new batch of popcorn into the air. What's wrong, King? Had enough yet? The guardian had taunted. The king was now becoming tired and slowly losing ground in the stool. His breathing became a bit more erratic, as he was starting to become winded. The king was tired, but wasn't entirely out of tricks just yet. He struck the ground with his blade, stabbing it into the ashy earth, and a solid sheet of ice quickly began making its way towards the guardian. Unable to dodge, the ice started to cover the creature and started to freeze it, slowly leaving the guardian unable to move. The king grabbed his blade and approached the frozen monster as its whole exterior finally froze over. He then began to hit it repeatedly with his sword over and over. The guardian's surface seemed unyielding to the brunt force of the king's attack. While the king was continuing his forceful attack, it looked as though the cloaked figure had somehow already made it down the mountainside. They silently approached the carriage from the shadows and slipped inside with Leon. Perhaps it's someone else? Leon thought, unsure of how someone could make it down that fast. Either way, it didn't matter to Leon, and the cover of the blizzard-like conditions were beginning to slowly dissipate. Vance and Dane were stuck helplessly watching Leon, unable to do anything else. The figure poured something on the chains that were holding Leon, which caused them to crack and break with ease. It seemed as though whatever it was corroded the material instantly. He was able to move freely and began to rub his wrists that had been chained up tightly for quite some time. "Who are you?" he whispered softly. The cloaked figure said no words and just motioned for him to follow. Leon had been burned before for following someone that had seemed to have saved him from a terrible predicament. This time, though, his only other option was to stay here and see what terrible fate awaited him at the end of this carriage ride. He didn't dare wait around to find out what that was. He followed the cloaked figure to the other side of the carriage. The humans that had once been chained to pull it were now all free. On the other side, the frozen king had seemed to have dropped his guard and got a bit too close to the guardian. Just after finally breaking a chunk of its armored exterior and impaling it with his sword, the guardian broke through the ice, dropped one of the halberds, and grabbed the king by the throat. "Bravo! Bravo! Magnificent!" Remy yelled out ecstatically. The other guardians grunted and hollered in unison. "Yield, you weak, pathetic human! I'll never stop fighting to protect my son, you filthy creature," the king said in defiance. "You've lost. Admit defeat." "What do we do?" one of the cloakmen said to the other who had peered around the corner. "You mean about the others in cages, no?" "Aye, what I'm talking about." "Well..." The second man paused. "I don't think it's smart move to try and approach them. Getting this one out was risky enough." "Do we just leave them? And what of your old friend Clavin over there?" "Well, it's not like I don't want to help him. However, he did choose his own path. But I really don't like leaving those in cages, as it wasn't personal choice. I know you want to fight, Ragnar, but logically, I do not think we have enough to do it." Leon sat there annoyed at the situation, not knowing what to think of it all. "Who are you guys?" The unknown man looked at Leon. "We are humanity's lost hope. We are the resistance." Part 2. Leon looked them over and didn't know what to think of them. They did seem more trustworthy than others that had offered to help him before. But was this true? "Should we call in reinforcements? I know it's risky, but these innocents, just what in Odin's name have they been through to look so meager?" The man sat there and looked at the poor corpses in the cages from a distance. "Good. The problem is, Ragnar, as I'm sure you already know, that there's not a normal battalion in front of us. These are our godly guardians, and while they don't look cream of the crop, they are still strong. That's not to say we couldn't take them. We could. But do you think we could do so while we protect those engages, the hostages, and fend off Remy in the process? I do not see much chance of it happening without some consequence. Leon felt terrible about the others in the cages. While none of them were as talkative or even as open as Tritho had been, he couldn't help but feel it was from the torment they had endured. If he had been through this in just a few days, he couldn't imagine what these poor souls had been through. What if you use me as bait? Leon interjected. They both looked at him curiously, like he had just said something very dumb. He continued. It seems to me for some reason I'm highly valued. So if you use me as bait, couldn't you distract them enough to get the others out of there? They thought it over for a moment. It could work, replied Ragnar while inspecting Leon. The other man took a bit longer to think it over, and then finally agreed, to some extent. You're right. It could work. But if it doesn't, then all of this is for nothing. We then also put him in danger, have the chance of losing a priority target and conquest. Not to mention, I doubt he'd make enough of destruction to destruct all the gods. We've been tracking him since we arrived. He is risky enough given where we are and what we are doing. It's only a matter of time before they notice that he's gone from the garage. I wonder if these are the others that had chased us into that cave behind the bookshelf, Leon thought to himself. You are our priority, and as much as I hate to say, I think we must. Leon jumped in. Don't you think saving those in the cages is worth the risk? You said it yourself, they didn't choose this. Correct. The thing is, I can't guarantee your safety. And I never asked you to. I've been in this world for only a few days at best, and I'm disgusted by mostly everything I've seen. People selling each other, others killing whomever they want with no remorse for what they've done. And worst of all, turning those corpses into food for those in the cages? It's all sickening. The man looked at Leon in disgust. He's been feeding them humans? Have things really gotten so bad for Cleven to fall this far? Leon paused for a moment before continuing. Something about him seemed a bit disparaged about it, like he convinced himself it was okay, as long as it was for survival, but even so, the man just looked even more disappointed. I didn't know things had gotten to this point. He said it in a way that made it sound as though he himself had felt in a significant way. He pondered for a moment, and it looked as though he was having a grand debate within his mind. Finally, he came to a decision. All right, let's do it, Ragnar. Let's put on a grand spectacle to distract all the gods and save those in the cages. If possible, perhaps I can even save my old friend Cleven. Part 3. While they had their discussions, the king didn't seem to be faring well at all. I will not surrender, the king said once more, looking at the disgusting creature. The guardian, still laughing, asked, Remy, am I not the winner of this contest? I could crush this pathetic king's throat at any time if I chose to do so. Remy pondered for a moment, and then replied with a smile. Curious, curious. It seems, my dear friend, you are in quite the bind. More so than you realize. I'm quite sorry, but you have lost this, though. You fought well. You fought well indeed. You see, my king, your baby is mine, it said with a giant disgusting smile on its face. Oh, no, no, no. On the contrary, you see, the king has bested you.
It's hands down his win, I'm afraid. Confused, are we?
He smiled and grabbed the Guardian's arm. With little effort, he pried it from his neck. It cracked, and small pieces fell away as he moved.
Have you ever heard of black ice? It's a term on Earth that we use for ice that can be very dangerous, yet it's almost invisible. Even though it's very thin and frail, it can cause quite a bit of damage if you're not careful. I'm afraid that's what's happened to you. You see, if this were a normal match and you were allowed to kill me, I'm afraid I'm just not enough to beat you as I am. That's not how it worked out, though, is it?
The Guardian slowly lost its balance and control of its motor functions, making a loud thump as it dropped to its knees.
I was able to slowly and invisibly end you. The moment I penetrated your shell, my cold frost seeped its way inside and has been slowly spreading like cancer, freezing your insides. I believe it has reached your synapses by now, and well,
The Guardian started cracking like a bad case of dry skin and began to fall apart, piece by piece. It tried to speak, but could not form anything coherent. This was the only sound that it made out.
I told you you would die if you tried to take my son.
The king took his sword from where it had been stuck in the Guardian and sliced up through its thick frozen skull with little effort at all. The sound of cracking, slicing through frozen flesh, bone, and other material along the way was very satisfying to both the king and to Remy. The sound of Remy clapping and cheering was like that of a madman.
What a wonderful performance! Just wonderful! Wonderful!
At that moment, someone else began clapping. Remy looked up to see a cloaked man with Leon by his side. Good job, Clevin. I didn't think you'd pull it off. I guess you haven't lost everything yet, have you? The king knew who it was before he even looked. It was his old ally, as well as his rival and mentor. It was a man who had been here for much longer than he had. A man who had slain a dragon in his previous life. One of the men who had left the kingdom to form the resistance with others after the tides of battle had turned for the worse. The man was Dabriana Nikitich.